The Adventures of Sherlock Holmes, 1892, Episode 2. The Red-Headed League. Welcome back, fellow detectives. After witnessing Holmes's encounter with the brilliant Irene Adler, you might think you've seen the most unusual case possible. But today's mystery will challenge everything you think you know about criminal schemes. Have you ever heard of an organization that pays people simply for having red hair? Well, prepare yourself for one of the most bizarre and ingenious plots in criminal history. Picture yourself on an autumn morning in 1890, once again in the comfortable sitting room at 2121B Baker Street. The fog is just lifting from the London streets when Mrs. Hudson announces an unusual visitor. Up the stairs comes a man who immediately catches your attention. He's enormously stout with fiery red hair that seems to flame in the gaslight. His face bears the expression of someone who's experienced something so strange he can barely believe it himself. "Mr. Wilson," Holmes says, rising to greet him, "I perceive you've been doing a great deal of writing lately. Also that you're a Freemason, you've been to China recently, and that you've done considerable manual labor in the past. Most interesting of all, you appear to be extremely perplexed about something. Now here's your first detective challenge. How could Holmes possibly know all these details about a complete stranger? Look at Mr. Wilson carefully. What physical clues might reveal his recent activities? Think about what signs would indicate extensive writing, travel to China, or membership in the Freemasons." Mr. Wilson stares in amazement. "How on earth did you know about China? And yes, I am a Freemason, but how could you possibly tell?" Holmes gestures toward the man's hands, his clothing, even the way he holds himself. Every detail tells a story to the trained observer. "But that's not why I'm here," Wilson continues, his voice filled with bewilderment. "I've come about the most extraordinary thing that's ever happened to me. It's so bizarre that my assistant Vincent Spaulding suggested I consult you, though I can't imagine what you'll make of it." The story Wilson tells is so strange it sounds almost like a fairy tale. 8 weeks ago, my assistant came to me with a newspaper advertisement. "Have you ever heard of the Red-Headed League, Mr. Holmes?" When Holmes shakes his head, Wilson continues, "Neither had I, but according to this advertisement, it was founded by an American millionaire named Ezekiah Hopkins." Think about this for a moment. What kind of organization would be specifically founded for people with red hair? What possible purpose could such a league serve? Already your detective instincts should be tingling that something isn't quite right about this story. Wilson explains further. The league was established to provide easy work and good pay for men with red hair. The requirements were strict. You had to be over 21, in sound mind and body, and above all have genuinely red hair, no dyed hair accepted. My assistant Vincent was tremendously excited about this opportunity. He's a smart young fellow, about 30, with a white splash of acid across his forehead from a laboratory accident. He's been invaluable in my pawnbroking business on Saxe-Coburg Square. Now pay attention to these details about the assistant. They'll become crucial later. A pawnbroker's assistant who knows about chemistry and laboratory work. Someone who's particularly eager for his employer to take this mysterious job. What does your detective intuition tell you about Vincent Spaulding? Wilson continues his remarkable tale. Vincent insisted we go to the League's offices immediately at Pope's Court, Fleet Street. When we arrived, I've never seen such a sight. The street was packed with red-headed men of every shade you can imagine. Orange, brick red, Irish setter red, liver red, clay red. It was like a rainbow of redheads all pushing toward one small office. Can you picture this extraordinary scene? Hundreds of red-headed men all competing for the same mysterious position? But here's what should strike you as odd. If this league was so well known and advertised, why had no one ever heard of it before? Why did only Wilson's assistant seem to know about it? Fortunately, Wilson says, Vincent pushed me right to the front of the queue. The man interviewing candidates took one look at my hair and declared it the most magnificent red he'd ever seen. "You are the perfect candidate for the Red-Headed League," he announced. I got the position on the spot. The job itself was absurdly simple. Wilson was to copy out the Encyclopedia Britannica by hand, 4 hours a day, Monday through Friday, for the excellent wages of £4 a week. The only conditions were that he could never leave the office during working hours, and that the position would end without notice when the League's purposes were fulfilled. Think about this arrangement carefully, detective. Why would anyone pay someone £4 a week, excellent money in 1890, just to copy out an encyclopedia? What possible benefit could this serve? And why the strict requirement that Wilson never leave during those specific hours? For 8 wonderful weeks, I faithfully copied out articles about abbots and archery, then moved on to Attica and architecture. Wilson continues. Vincent ran my pawn shop while I was away, and everything seemed perfectly arranged. The work was easy, the pay was excellent, and I was perfectly content. But here's where the story takes its mysterious turn. Yesterday morning, I arrived at Pope's Court to find a simple notice pinned to the door. The Red-Headed League is dissolved. October 9th, 1890. That was all. No explanation, no forwarding address, no final payment. I've been cheated out of my easy employment. What's your assessment of this situation, detective? Does Wilson seem like the victim of a simple hoax, or could something much more sinister be happening? Why would anyone create such an elaborate scheme just to employ one red-headed pawnbroker for 2 months? Holmes has been listening with growing interest, his fingertips pressed together in his characteristic thinking pose. Mr. Wilson, he says finally, I don't believe you've been the victim of a prank. I suspect you've been an unwitting participant in a very serious crime. A crime, Wilson gasps. But I've done nothing wrong. I simply copied encyclopedia entries for honest wages. Exactly, Holmes replies, his eyes gleaming with excitement. You've been kept busy and away from your shop for 4 hours every day for 2 months. The question is, what was happening at your pawn shop while you were gone that required your absence? Now think about this like a detective. If someone wanted to keep a pawnbroker away from his shop for specific hours on specific days, what might they be planning? What opportunities would this create for someone with access to the premises? Holmes springs into action. Watson, detective friend, we must visit Saxe-Coburg Square immediately. Mr. Wilson, is your assistant Vincent Spaulding at the shop now? When Wilson confirms that he is, Holmes's expression becomes very serious indeed. As you travel through London's streets toward the pawn shop, Holmes shares his preliminary deductions. Consider the facts. An organization that appears from nowhere, offers impossibly good wages for meaningless work, and requires the beneficiary to be absent from his business during specific hours. This isn't charity, it's misdirection on a grand scale. But what could Vincent want with my little pawn shop? Wilson asks. It's not particularly profitable, and I keep very little money on the premises. Holmes's eyes narrow. Mr. Wilson, what other businesses are located near your shop on Saxe-Coburg Square? When Wilson mentions the City and Suburban Bank directly behind his building, Holmes nods grimly. I thought as much. We're not dealing with a simple confidence trick. We're looking at one of the most audacious bank robbery schemes ever conceived. The pieces are starting to fall into place now, aren't they, detective? A pawn shop conveniently located next to a bank, an assistant with chemistry knowledge who could handle explosives, and an employer kept safely away during the exact hours when the real work was being done. What do you think Vincent Spaulding has been doing during those 4 hours every day for 8 weeks? You arrive at Saxe-Coburg Square to find a narrow, shabby street lined with small businesses. Wilson's pawn shop sits directly between a tobacco shop and a restaurant, with the imposing City and Suburban Bank looming directly behind it. Holmes examines the area with intense interest, paying particular attention to the pavement in front of the pawn shop. Mr. Wilson, Holmes says, I'd like to meet your remarkable assistant, Vincent Spaulding. Would you introduce us as potential customers interested in selling some items? As you enter the pawn shop, a young man emerges from the back room, about 30 years old with a distinctive white acid burn across his forehead, just as Wilson described. But Holmes takes one look at this assistant, and his entire demeanor changes. He studies the man's face with the intensity of someone recognizing a dangerous criminal. What do you think Holmes has realized about Vincent Spaulding's true identity? After leaving the shop, Holmes shares a disturbing revelation. That man is no ordinary pawnshop assistant. Unless I'm very much mistaken, Vincent Spaulding is actually John Clay, one of the most cunning criminals in London and a master of disguise. He's wanted for numerous burglaries and has evaded capture for years. But why would a master criminal work as a pawnbroker's assistant? Wilson asks in bewilderment. Holmes points toward the bank behind Wilson's shop. Because, Mr. Wilson, for 8 weeks while you've been safely copying encyclopedia entries, John Clay has been digging a tunnel from your basement directly into the bank's vault. Tonight, I believe, he plans to complete the most audacious robbery in London's history. Can you imagine the scale of this deception? An entire fake organization created just to keep one man away from his shop while criminals dug a tunnel beneath his feet. The Red-Headed League wasn't a charitable organization. It was the most elaborate alibi ever constructed. Holmes immediately sends word to Inspector Jones at Scotland Yard and arranges for bank officials to be quietly alerted. Tonight we'll be waiting in the bank's vault when Mr. Clay emerges from his tunnel. After 2 months of careful preparation, he won't expect to find a welcoming committee. That evening finds you crouched in the darkness of the bank vault, surrounded by gold bars and securities worth hundreds of thousands of pounds. The silence is profound until you hear it, a faint scratching sound from beneath your feet growing steadily louder. Suddenly, a section of the stone floor begins to lift, and a lantern appears in the opening. Up comes John Clay himself, covered in dirt but grinning with triumph, until he sees Holmes waiting calmly with his revolver drawn and Inspector Jones ready with handcuffs. "Good evening, Mr. Clay," Holmes says pleasantly. "I trust your tunnel construction went smoothly. You've been working very industriously for someone who was supposedly just a pawnbroker's assistant." Clay's face shows grudging admiration even as the handcuffs click into place. "You saw through the Red-Headed League, did you, Mr. Holmes? I thought it was rather a brilliant scheme myself." "Brilliant indeed," Holmes agrees. "Creating an entire fictional organization just to keep Mr. Wilson away from his basement while you dug your tunnel. You nearly succeeded in pulling off the crime of the century." As the police lead Clay away, Holmes explains the final details to Wilson. "Your assistant spent 8 weeks excavating a tunnel from your basement to the bank vault. The Red-Headed League was his way of ensuring you'd be elsewhere during the digging hours. When the tunnel was complete, the League conveniently dissolved so he could execute the robbery." Poor Wilson shakes his head in amazement. "To think I was so pleased with my easy employment. But Holmes, how did you know from the beginning that something was wrong?" "Several things troubled me immediately," Holmes replies. "First, why would anyone pay good money for such meaningless work? Second, why specifically target red-headed men? Third, why require you to stay in the office during those exact hours? The entire scheme was designed around keeping you away from your shop, which suggested something valuable was happening there in your absence. So tell me, detective, did you solve this puzzle before Holmes revealed the truth? What clues told you that Vincent Spaulding was more than he seemed? And what does this case teach us about how the most outrageous lies can sometimes hide the simplest criminal motives?" This remarkable case shows us that sometimes the most complex deceptions serve the most basic purposes. The Red-Headed League will go down in criminal history as one of the most creative alibis ever constructed, even though it ultimately failed against Holmes's deductive genius. Join me next time as we investigate A Case of Identity, another mystery where appearances deceive and nothing is quite what it seems.